You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis or like sports science in general, there's this expectation of extreme precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it feels like
Usually.
engineering. Someone breaks their arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, right there, broken.
Right. And it's comforting because it's binary. You have a visible problem, you categorize it neatly into a box, and you apply a universal fix.
But then, you step into the world of female exercise physiology, and suddenly it feels like that x-ray machine is just completely busted.
It really does.
Because, you've handed us a massive stack of sources for today, decades of physiological studies, clinical protocols from researchers like Dr. Stacy Sims, and aggregate user data from FitPA. And looking at all this, the performance landscape for female athletes is honestly kind of murky.
Yeah, murky is a good word for it.
Right. On one side, you have this massive marketing industry trying to slap a pink label on every single sports product, insisting that a woman needs a completely different, specialized formula for every single thing she does.
Exactly, the whole shrink it and pink it mentality.
Yeah, and then on the other side, you have traditional sports science that historically just treats a woman's body like a smaller version of a man's body.
Which is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Navigating this requires a highly critical eye because neither of those extremes is biologically accurate.
And that is exactly our mission today. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. This is actually part 5 in our She's Built Different series, which is a core component of the Train Smarter program by FitPA.
It's been a great series so far.
It really has. Over our previous sessions, we've covered the hormonal foundation, how to approach strength training across different life stages, and how environmental factors like heat, cold, and altitude hit a woman's physiology differently.
Right.
But today, we're going inside the body even further. We are looking at the engine itself. What she eats, what she drinks, how her gut processes it under extreme stress, and how her body repairs the damage afterward.
And to do that, we really need to establish the core framework for today's deep dive.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
We are going to be completely honest with you about which aspects of fueling, hydration, recovery, and gastrointestinal function are genuinely different for women due to sex-specific physiology, and, crucially, which are not meaningfully different at all.
So separating the biology from the marketing.
Exactly. We are cutting through the noise to find the actual science.
Because that is the real performance edge. It isn't buying a pink-labeled hydration mix. It's knowing where the science actually supports a different physiological approach versus where universal sports science applies across the board.
Totally.
So let's unpack the first major area, which is fueling. Because looking through these studies, this seems to be where the research shows the most consistently replicated, robust sex difference of all.
Without a doubt. I mean, if there is one fundamental physiological reality we want you to take away from the data, it is this. During endurance exercise, women oxidize proportionally more fat and less carbohydrate than men.
Wait, so they just naturally burn more fat?
Yes, and this isn't a fringe theory or some recent fitness fad. This has been independently verified across multiple clinical labs and decades of rigorous peer-reviewed research.
Okay, so if we use an automotive analogy here, a female athlete's body is naturally tuned like an engine built to run efficiently on diesel, which would be fat, rather than high-octane racing fuel, which would be the carbohydrates, for those really long hauls.
That's a really great way to look at it.
But why does her engine default to that? Like, what is happening at the cellular level that shifts that metabolic preference?
It essentially comes down to estrogen.
Estrogen, really?
Yeah, higher baseline estrogen levels are strongly associated with a greater fat oxidation capacity. What this means on a biological level is that estrogen actually upregulates, meaning it increases the activity and efficiency of certain enzymes within the muscle tissue that the body requires to burn fat.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, estrogen increases the availability of lipid transport proteins.
Okay, so those proteins are essentially the cargo trucks moving the fat into the furnace.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. They move the fat molecules into the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cells, so they can be burned for fuel.
Makes sense.
And because of this estrogen-driven pathway, a woman's body is naturally incredibly efficient at sparing its glycogen stores.
And glycogen is just the stored form of carbohydrates kept in the muscles and the liver, right?
Correct. By relying heavily on fat during prolonged submaximal exercise, her body holds on to that precious high-octane carbohydrate fuel for much longer.
I was reading through the notes on this, and I came across something that absolutely blew my mind.
Oh, the clinical trials.
Yeah. I initially wondered, How do the scientists actually know it's specifically the estrogen doing this, and not just some other correlation related to body composition or, I don't know, training history?
Right, it's a valid question. The clinical trials proving this are truly fascinating. Researchers wanted to isolate the variables, so they actually administered estrogen to male subjects in controlled clinical settings.
They gave estrogen to men.
They did. And then they measured their metabolic rates before, during, and after exercise.
And their bodies just started mimicking the female metabolic response, like just from the hormone.
Exactly. The men's fat-burning capacity significantly increased. They started sparing their muscle glycogen and oxidizing more fat during exercise.
That is crazy.
It proves conclusively that estrogen is a direct causal driver of this metabolic shift. It isn't just a coincidence of biological sex. The hormone itself flips the switch on fuel preference.
It literally changes the fuel preference of the engine on demand. But it's not just the hormones floating around in the bloodstream, is it? Because the sources also point out a structural difference in the muscles themselves.
Yeah, that ties into the broader musculoskeletal anatomy. When we look at muscle composition, women generally have proportionally more type 1 muscle fibers compared to type 2 muscle fibers.
Okay, just to make sure we are defining our terms for the listener. Type 1 fibers are the slow-twitch, fatigue-resistant fibers, like the endurance specialists.
Right. Type 1 fibers are densely packed with mitochondria and rely heavily on aerobic metabolism, meaning they use oxygen to generate energy.
Got it.
Because of that structure, they are physically built to burn fat for long, sustained, steady-state efforts.
And the type 2 fibers?
Type 2 fibers, on the other hand, are the fast-twitch fibers. They rely much more on anaerobic metabolism, burning through carbohydrates very quickly to produce explosive, short-duration power.
Okay, so because women have a higher baseline proportion of those type 1 fibers, their physiology is structurally constructed for endurance and fat burning from the ground up.
Exactly.
So if a female athlete has this incredible, highly efficient fat-burning engine, how does that impact the classic carb-loading protocol?
Oh, this is a huge one.
Because I'm looking at these old marathon training guides in our source stack, and they all recommend eating massive bowls of pasta for a week before a race to pack the muscles with glycogen. Does that work the same way for her?
This is a massive takeaway for anyone listening who competes in endurance events. The classic carb-loading protocol, where you taper your training volume and eat a diet that is roughly 70% carbohydrates for 3 to 4 days. Well, it was tested almost exclusively on male athletes in the original studies.
Of course it was.
Right. And what modern research shows is that for women, simply shifting the ratio of carbs on the plate is not enough to trigger that same glycogen storage benefit.
Wait, really?
Yeah, really.
So if she swaps out the chicken and broccoli for an extra mountain of pasta, but eats the exact same amount of calories overall, she doesn't actually top off the tank.
She does not. And it comes back to that biological efficiency we just talked about. For a woman to actually achieve supercompensation of muscle glycogen, which is just the scientific term for packing more carbs into the muscle than it normally holds, she must increase her total energy intake during the loading period.
Oh, I see.
Her body is so efficient at sparing glycogen and evolutionarily so sensitive to energy balance that if she just changes the percentages on her plate but keeps her total daily calories the same, the body won't bother packing away those extra carbs.
It just burns them normally?
Pretty much. It only stores them in excess if it senses a definitive surplus of total energy coming in.
You know, that makes perfect evolutionary sense. If her body doesn't sense an abundance of total fuel, it's not going to waste energy packing away high-octane reserves. It's just going to maintain its baseline.
Exactly.
But that brings up a really important question about life stages. What happens in a woman's body when those estrogen levels fluctuate? Specifically, we know estrogen dropped significantly during menopause.
We absolutely have to look honestly at the research on menopausal and postmenopausal women because the landscape changes dramatically. Because of that sharp drop in estrogen, fat-burning rates, both at rest and during steady-state exercise, appear to be significantly lower compared to premenopausal women. The metabolic advantage that estrogen provides for lipid oxidation essentially diminishes.
So the diesel engine starts acting more like a gasoline engine.
Yes, exactly.
Which means adjusting fueling strategies as a woman ages isn't just a suggestion. It's critical for performance. You can't just take the research done on young, eumenorrheic athletes. meaning women with regular natural menstrual cycles, and blindly apply it to someone in her 50s.
No, you can't. The engine has physically changed.
Yeah.
As estrogen drops, her body becomes more reliant on carbohydrates to fuel exercise and less efficient at utilizing her fat stores.
So what does that mean practically?
Practically, it means an older female athlete might actually need to adjust her intra-workout carbohydrate intake upward compared to what she consumed in her 20s or 30s because she is burning through those internal carb stores much faster than she used to.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of fueling. We have established a very real, very scientifically sound difference in how the engine runs. But what about the cooling system?
Hydration.
Yeah, let's transition into hydration.
Yeah.
Because if you walk down the aisle of any sports store, the marketing heavily implies that women need entirely different, specialized hydration products. Is female hydration actually different on a biological level?
The honest twist here is that the science is highly specific and it does not support the need for pink sports drinks.
Seriously.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Let's look at the actual empirical data on sweat rates. In our source stack, we have data from the GSSI, that stands for the Gatorade Sports Science Institute.
Right.
They compiled a massive data set of over 1,900 individual sweat tests.
Which is a remarkably huge sample size for exercise physiology.
It's massive. It provides a very clear population view, and when you look at that population average, the whole body sweat rate was indeed lower in women. Women averaged about 0.8 liters per hour of sweat loss, while men averaged about 1.2 liters per hour.
But wait, hold on. If the average woman is sweating 0.4 liters less per hour than the average man, doesn't that prove the marketing right?
Well,
Because a 0.4 liter per hour difference sounds pretty significant, especially if you're running a 4-hour marathon. That's over 1.5 liters of fluid difference by the finish line.
it sounds significant until you apply a critical eye to the variance within the groups.
What do you mean?
That 0.4 liter per hour gap between the male and female averages is much, much smaller than the range seen within each sex. If you look at a group of just women or just men, individual sweat rates can vary by over 2 liters per hour.
I see. So the difference between two individual women standing next to each other on a starting line could be 5 times larger than the average difference between men and women generally.
That is the exact key insight. Furthermore, when researchers take biological sex out of the equation entirely by matching subjects for body size, specifically looking at their body surface area to mass ratio, and matching them for the exact exercise intensity they are performing, that sex difference practically vanishes.
So it's just about size.
Mostly, yes. Body size, the physics of cooling a larger versus smaller mass, and the actual physical workload you are putting out drive the sweat rate gap much more than the biology of sex itself.
That perfectly illustrates why we call this muddy waters. Yes, there is a population-level difference on average, but it is practically useless for an individual female athlete trying to plan her race hydration.
Exactly.
Relying on an average could leave her severely underhydrated or dangerously overhydrated. She has to know her own numbers.
Which carries forward a crucial physiological reality we touched on in a previous deep dive. A sweat test is just a snapshot in time. It is not a fixed, immutable genetic trait.
Right.
A person's sweat sodium concentration varies based on their current state of heat acclimation, the environment, and even their daily diet.
I want to ask about the menstrual cycle's role in this too, because you constantly hear about bloating and water retention at different phases of the month. How does a woman's cycle impact her sweat rate and hydration needs during training?
This is one of the biggest reveals in the literature, and it contradicts a lot of popular assumptions.
Really?
Yeah. Multiple independent research teams have studied this exact question, and they have consistently found that the menstrual cycle phase specifically has little to no effect on exercise, fluid balance, sweat sodium concentration, or rehydration post-exercise.
No effect at all.
Practically none. The normal, day-to-day individual variation entirely overwhelms any minuscule sex or cycle differences.
So, to be completely clear, a woman does not need a different hydration formula for the follicular phase versus the luteal phase.
She absolutely does not. The universal sport science applies here. Test your own individual sweat rate, test your own sodium loss, and build a hydration plan around your specific physiology, not your cycle phase.
So let's talk practical application for the listener. We have Dr. Stacy Sims' clinical recommendations in these notes. And, we should be clear here that we are attributing this as her expert clinical recommendation based on her read of the science, not as an irrefutable law of physiology.
Right. It's her protocol.
How does she suggest active women handle their daily hydration?
Dr. Sims advocates a very straightforward empirical protocol. First, drink to thirst. Second, monitor your body weight. But you have to distinguish between water weight loss and tissue loss.
Meaning?
If you step on the scale and you are a full kilogram lighter the morning after a long run, you didn't burn a kilogram of fat overnight, you were simply dehydrated.
Right.
And third, check your urine color or your USG.
Let's define USG real quick. That stands for urine-specific gravity. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Which is essentially a scientific measure of the concentration of particles in your urine. The darker the color and the higher the USG, the more concentrated it is, meaning your kidneys are conserving water and you need to drink.
Precisely. And relying on these simple individual metrics prevents a very real danger in endurance sports, which is hyponatremia.
Oh, we really need to unpack hyponatremia. I've read horror stories about this.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a significant risk for smaller athletes, who are very often women, when they try to follow these arbitrary one-size-fits-all hydration rules.
It is a critical safety issue. Hyponatremia is a condition where the sodium levels in your blood become dangerously diluted.
And how does that happen?
This frequently happens when athletes blindly follow outdated rules like drink 8 glasses of water a day, or when they overconsume plain water during long endurance events without replacing the sodium they are sweating out.
Just flushing the system with plain water.
Yes, and because women generally have a lower total body water volume and a lower body mass than men, if a female athlete drinks the same sheer volume of plain water as a much larger male athlete, she will dilute her blood sodium much faster.
That makes sense physically.
It leads to cellular swelling, confusion, seizures, and it can be entirely fatal.
So she must hydrate for her specific size, her specific sweat rate, and her actual thirst, not according to some marketing slogan on a bottle.
Absolutely.
But speaking of bottles, what about mixing everything together? A lot of athletes use those heavy liquid nutrition products where the carbohydrates and the hydration are mixed into one super concentrated bottle.
Dr. Sims strongly advises against that approach for female athletes.
Really? Why is that?
When you mix high carbohydrate fuel and your hydration fluid into one heavy bottle, the osmolality or the concentration of particles in that fluid becomes very high.
Okay.
In order for the gut to actually absorb a fluid that dense, it has to pull water into the stomach from your bloodstream first just to dilute it. This process significantly slows down gastric emptying.
Oh, I see. I always think of the stomach in that situation like a very exclusive nightclub.
A nightclub?
Yeah. If the concentration of people, or in this case carbohydrates, is too high, the bouncer at the door implements a strict one-in, one-out policy. The fluid just sloshes around in the stomach instead of getting absorbed into the body where it's needed.
That is a perfect metaphor. The system just backs up. Her recommendation is to decouple them.
Decouple the fuel and the fluid.
Right. Fuel the body with solid food or highly concentrated carb sources like gels, and handle hydration separately with lower osmolality fluids. Those are fluids that have a concentration of particles much closer to that of your own blood, allowing them to pass through the stomach lining quickly and efficiently.
Which actually brings us to the perfect pivot, because we just mentioned gastric emptying and sloshing stomachs. Let's look at what happens when that nightclub gets completely out of hand, and the gut just flat out rejects the fuel and fluid you are putting into it.
The dreaded runner's gut.
Yes, the sources detail this phenomenon called gastrointestinal distress or GI distress.
It is incredibly common and it can absolutely ruin a race. We are talking about GI or gastrointestinal symptoms. This relates to the entire digestive tract from the stomach all the way through the intestines.
And the symptoms are pretty awful, right?
Oh, yeah. Severe stomach pain, intense cramps, bloating, nausea, and the sudden urgent need to defecate.
Not fun.
Not at all. And while it happens to athletes of all genders, the epidemiological studies consistently show that female runners, particularly young female runners, report significantly higher rates of these GI symptoms than men.
So if the digestive system is perfectly healthy at rest, what are the actual mechanisms causing it to violently rebel during a run?
There are a couple of compounding layers to this. First, there is the purely mechanical cause. The sheer up and down bounding motion of running physically jostles the internal organs, which can cause irritation.
It's bouncing around.
Exactly. But the much more profound physiological cause is a mechanism called splanchnic hypoperfusion.
Okay, let's translate splanchnic hypoperfusion for the listener, because that sounds intense.
It does. Splanchnic refers to the organs contained within the abdominal cavity, so the stomach, intestines, liver, etc. And hypoperfusion means a severely reduced flow of blood.
Okay, so a lack of blood flow to the gut.
Right. When you start exercising intensely, your body is suddenly faced with a circulatory crisis. It has to make a triage choice. It desperately needs a massive amount of oxygen-rich blood sent to the working muscles in your legs to sustain the effort. And it also needs blood sent to the skin to facilitate sweating and cooling.
Because there's a finite amount of blood in the human body.
Exactly.
I always visualize this like a spaceship in a sci-fi movie taking heavy fire. The alarms are blaring, and the captain shouts, "Divert all power from life support systems and route everything to the thrusters and the shields."
That's a great visual.
In this physiological scenario, the life support system is the digestive tract, and the thrusters are the legs.
It is exactly like a triage protocol. The body literally constricts the blood vessels feeding the gut, reducing blood flow to the digestive tract by up to 80% during heavy exercise.
80%, wow.
Yeah. And when the gut is starved of blood and oxygen to that extreme degree, it simply cannot properly digest or absorb food. The mucosal lining of the intestines, which requires constant oxygen to maintain its barrier, can actually become physically damaged.
That sounds dangerous.
It leads to a condition called increased intestinal permeability.
Meaning the physical barrier breaks down, and things can leak across the intestinal wall into the bloodstream that aren't supposed to be there.
Yes, which triggers a massive inflammatory response and terrible cramping.
But, that happens to everyone. Why do female athletes report this so much more often? Where do the specific hormones come into play?
The hormonal influence on gut motility, which is the speed at which food and waste move through the digestive tract, is profound. Both estrogen and progesterone affect this motility.
How so?
Progesterone, in particular, has a relaxing effect on smooth muscle tissue, which is precisely what the intestines are made of. When progesterone levels are high, such as during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, GI transit time naturally slows down.
Wait, so the muscles of the gut are literally too relaxed to push the food through efficiently.
Correct.
So the food and the fluids just sit in the stomach and intestines much longer than usual.
Precisely. And if you take an already sluggish, progesterone-influenced gut, and you add the intense stress of splanchnic hypoperfusion on top of it, you are setting the stage for major gastrointestinal distress.
That is a terrible combination.
It is. The practical takeaway from the research is that long endurance efforts and heavy, high-carbohydrate fueling protocols may be much better tolerated during the follicular phase.
And the follicular phase is?
That is the first half of the menstrual cycle, right after bleeding starts, when both estrogen and progesterone are low, and gut motility is operating at a faster, less disrupted baseline.
That is incredibly practical knowledge. If a female athlete is building out a multi-month training calendar, she might want to look at her cycle and purposefully schedule her longest, heaviest fueled efforts during that follicular window to maximize her gut's ability to handle the stress.
It's a very smart strategy.
But what about the menopause gap in the research? We have to look at the other end of the hormonal spectrum. When the hormones drop off permanently, does runner's gut get better or does it get worse?
This is where we have to be extremely careful not to outpace the actual data. In our sources, we have a comprehensive survey from December 2025 looking specifically at endurance athletes aged 40 to 60.
And what did it find?
The honest reality is that menopausal athletes report a high prevalence of systemic issues that deeply impact their ability to train. Severe sleep problems, deep exhaustion, hot flashes, and joint pain.
The systemic impact is undeniable.
It is. Furthermore, we do have distinct research showing that the permanent drop in estrogen postmenopause is linked to general changes in the gut microbiome.
Wow.
This can cause resting, everyday bloating, and digestive complaints outside of exercise.
Okay, so general gut issues.
However, and this is a crucial distinction for us to make, severe GI distress during exercise was not a headline finding in that specific athletic survey.
Oh, really?
Right. So we cannot definitively say that menopause inherently makes runners' gut worse.
It's just a blank spot in the data.
Exactly. The direct question of whether exercise-induced GI distress gets worse, gets better, or stays exactly the same after menopause is simply an open, largely unstudied question in the current literature. We shouldn't guess at an answer or prescribe a solution that the rigorous research doesn't yet support.
Fair enough. But for any athlete dealing with this, regardless of their age or cycle phase, what are the practical management strategies? Because if you are running an ultramarathon, you can't just stop fueling.
No, you absolutely cannot stop fueling, but you can strictly manage what you put into the system. The actionable strategies from the literature are to completely avoid high-fat and high-fiber foods in the immediate hours before a race or a heavy session.
Because they digest too slowly.
Right. Both fat and fiber inherently delay gastric emptying, keeping food in the stomach longer. You also want to avoid huge, heavy meals right before the gun goes off. And critically, you have to practice training the gut.
Which means treating your digestive system like another muscle and practicing your race day nutrition during your long training runs.
Exactly. The gut is highly adaptable. If you consistently expose it to carbohydrates and fluid while running, the transport proteins in the intestines actually upregulate over time.
They get better at their job.
They do. They biologically adapt, becoming more dense and much better at absorbing those specific nutrients, even under the stress of reduced blood flow.
I want to jump in with a massive warning from the sources here too, because when athletes get sore, their first instinct is often to reach for over-the-counter pain relievers. We really need to talk about NSAIDs and the gut.
It is a critical warning.
NSAIDs stand for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. These are common medications like ibuprofen or naproxen, and the clinical research strongly, unequivocally, links taking NSAIDs before or during exercise to significantly worse exercise-induced GI symptoms.
The mechanism there is very clear.
Yeah.
NSAIDs work by inhibiting prostaglandins.
And what do those do?
Prostaglandins are compounds that the gut desperately needs to maintain that protective mucosal lining we talked about earlier. Yeah, so when you combine the oxygen starvation of splanchnic hypoperfusion with the chemical inhibition of NSAIDs, you are dramatically increasing the risk of severe intestinal damage, bleeding, and crippling cramping.
So the science says avoid them completely around heavy training.
Completely.
Absolutely. So let's assume the workout is done, the NSAIDs were avoided, and hopefully her gut has settled down. How does the body actually repair all of this microdamage?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If the intestinal walls are physically compromised from lack of blood flow and the leg muscles are torn down, how does a woman's physiology handle the rebuilding process? Let's look at recovery. Sleep, the dangers of fasting, and the honest unknowns.
I am going to be very upfront with our listeners about this section. When we look at female-specific recovery metrics, this is the area with the absolute least settled science in our entire source stack.
Really? Which is surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
It seems like sleep and soreness should be the easiest things to measure in a lab.
You would think so, but the data is incredibly divided, largely because of the historical exclusion of women from exercise science trials.
Oh, because they didn't want to deal with the cycle.
Exactly. Researchers historically viewed the menstrual cycle as too complex a variable to control for, so they just studied men. Now that they're finally studying women, the findings on sleep, for instance, are conflicting.
How so?
Sleep is the absolute foundation of all physiological recovery. Some studies show very clear objective shifts in sleep architecture around menstruation. For example, some researchers have found an increased total time in bed and significantly more slow-wave, deeply restorative sleep on actual bleeding days compared to non-bleeding days in the cycle.
Which implies the body is actively prioritizing deep tissue repair and recovery during that specific hormonal window.
That's what it implies.
So I'm guessing there's a catch, given what you said about unsettled science.
The catch is that other, equally rigorous studies, often looking at broader sleep quality metrics and overall recovery stress states across the entire cycle, show absolutely no significant differences at all from phase to phase.
So it's a wash.
It is an actively debated field, constantly hampered by small sample sizes and inconsistent methodologies across different labs.
So we can't definitively sit here and say a woman's sleep is biologically destined to be worse in this phase and better in that phase. It appears to be highly individual.
Very individual.
But looking through these notes, there is one area of recovery where the science is absolutely not up for debate and the consequences are severe. And that is the issue of underfueling.
Oh, that is the most critical issue in female endurance sports.
Yeah.
If a woman does not fuel the work she is doing, her body doesn't just get tired, it fundamentally stalls. We have to define two critical acronyms here that every listener should know: LEA and UDS.
Let's do LEA first.
LEA stands for low energy availability. This happens when the total calories an athlete consumes are simply not enough to cover both her baseline physiological needs, just keeping the organs running, and the immense energy she expends during exercise.
It's a simple math problem that turns into a biological crisis.
Exactly.
And if LEA goes on for too long, it develops into RODS.
Yes, RODS is relative energy deficiency in sport.
Right.
It is a comprehensive systemic syndrome that negatively affects almost every single physiological system in the human body. The symptoms aren't just a drop in body weight.
What else happens?
They include severe irritability, a deep, pervasive fatigue that doesn't go away with rest, chronically poor sleep quality, and a constant frustrating sense that training is just much harder than it should be.
And it has severe, irreversible long-term consequences for female athletes, right?
Mm.
The sources tie this directly into what the medical community used to call the female athlete triad.
Exactly. The triad described the profound interrelationship between three factors: low energy availability, menstrual irregularity or amenorrhea, which is the complete loss of the menstrual period, and dangerously low bone mineral density.
Wow.
When the female body senses it is effectively starving due to a massive calorie deficit, it goes into a severe preservation mode. It literally shuts down non-essential functions to ensure basic survival.
And reproduction is deemed non-essential.
Exactly. Hence, the reproductive system shuts down and the periods stop. Consequently, estrogen drops to menopausal levels, which completely halts the bone-building process. This leads to rampant stress fractures and early-onset osteoporosis in very young athletes.
Wait, so her body literally looks at the energy math, realizes there aren't enough calories to sustain life, and just pulls the plug on the reproductive and skeletal systems to save power.
That is exactly what happens.
That is terrifying. And it makes me want to ask about a massive trend right now in the fitness world, which is intermittent fasting. Because fasting is essentially structured, purposeful underfueling for certain hours of the day. How does a woman's body react to fasting when it's combined with heavy endurance or strength training?
Let's bring Dr. Sims's perspective back into the conversation here, because she is very vocal about this.
What does she say?
Her clinical observation is that fasting, when it is layered on top of intense athletic training, keeps active women in a prolonged catabolic state.
Catabolic meaning the body is actively breaking down its own tissue, like muscle, rather than building it up.
Correct. We have to look at the cortisol awakening response. When you wake up in the morning, your cortisol, which is your primary stress hormone, is naturally at its peak.
Okay, that's normal.
This morning rise is a normal biological function. It's supposed to wake you up and get you moving. But if you then go and execute a hard, demanding workout while remaining in a fasted state, you are layering extreme exercise stress on top of an already high stress hormone baseline.
And her body reacts poorly to that.
Very poorly. For women who are evolutionarily wired to be exquisitely sensitive to energy deficits in order to protect reproductive capacity, this massive, unmitigated cortisol spike signals starvation and triggers an evolutionary panic button.
So instead of adapting to the workout and getting stronger, her body goes into deep preservation mode.
Yes. Sims observes that active women can generally only hold an intermittent fasting protocol for about 3 months before severe negative repercussions hit.
What happens then?
Their sleep architecture starts to suffer, their thyroid function actually downregulates to slow their metabolism, and they begin to hold on to body fat because the body is terrified it's starving and needs to hoard resources.
The biology is literally fighting the training.
It is fighting it every step of the way.
So what is the physiological solution to that?
Eat breakfast.
Really, just breakfast.
It sounds simple, but breakfast serves a crucial biochemical recovery role. Providing fuel early in the day actively brings down that morning cortisol rise, signaling to the nervous system that the environment is safe, the body is not starving, and it can safely shift from a catabolic tissue breakdown state into an anabolic muscle repair and recovery state.
It is so counterintuitive to the prevailing fitness and diet culture right now, but the evolutionary biology makes perfect sense.
It really does.
While we are on the topic of recovery and repair, I want to take a brief look at the physical tools athletes use. Pretty much every endurance athlete has a pair of tight compression socks in their drawer. Let's talk about vascular health and compression gear. Does it actually work?
Compression gear is ubiquitous, and to be scientifically fair, it operates on a very plausible physiological mechanism.
Meaning, we understand how it should work in theory based on the physics of the circulatory system.
Exactly. The tight graded pressure of compression garments is specifically designed to improve venous return, which is the process of physically pushing deoxygenated blood back up from the legs against gravity to the heart.
Right?
It is also designed to improve overall muscle blood flow. The theory is that if you are clearing metabolic waste products out of the damaged tissue faster, you should logically recover faster.
But looking at the actual clinical outcome data in these sources, I sense a but coming.
Yeah, the honest evidence on the actual performance outcomes is decidedly mixed.
Mixed how?
When systematic reviewers look at all the available studies and ask the practical questions like, does it actually reduce perceived soreness? Or does it actually make the athlete faster or more powerful the next day? The results are incredibly inconsistent.
So it might not do anything.
Well, some smaller studies show a slight subjective benefit in how sore the athletes feel. However, many others show absolutely zero measurable difference in objective performance markers like sprint speed or jumping power the day after a hard session.
So what is the practical takeaway for the listener who just spent $80 on compression boots?
It is a fundamentally low-risk tool.
Yeah.
If you are standing on your feet all day for work, or you have a long-haul flight immediately after a race, it might genuinely help your vascular circulation and reduce uncomfortable swelling.
But it's not magic.
Exactly. Do not expect it to be a magic physiological cure for tired legs if you haven't already nailed your foundational sleep and your fueling protocols. And of course, anyone with a specific history of vascular issues should consult their doctor before using heavy compression.
Okay, so we have covered an immense amount of complex physiology today.
We really have.
We've looked at the estrogen-driven fat-burning engine, the individual physics of sweat rates, the vascular triage of splanchnic hypoperfusion causing GI distress, the evolutionary panic of cortisol spikes, and the murky data on sleep.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So with all of these moving parts, where does a technological tool like FitPA fit into all of this? Because we are throwing a lot of raw science at the listener, and tracking all of this manually seems completely impossible.
This is exactly where FitPA bridges the gap between universal science and individualized application. It grounds all of this abstract theory in your actual personal biological data.
How does he do that?
The app syncs directly with your wearable device to pull in continuous daily wellness metrics. It tracks your sleep duration and sleep stages, your resting heart rate, and crucially, your HRV.
Let's define HRV because it's a metric that gets thrown around a lot but is rarely understood.
Good idea. HRV stands for heart rate variability. It measures the very small natural variation in the exact time between your heartbeats.
And why does that matter?
It is a direct window into your autonomic nervous system. A higher HRV generally indicates that your nervous system is balanced between the sympathetic fight-or-flight mode and the parasympathetic rest and digest mode. It means you are recovering well and ready to adapt to stress.
And a lower HRV.
A lower HRV, conversely, means your body is stuck in a stress state and is actively struggling to recover. FitPA takes all of these continuous data points, HRV, sleep architecture, resting heart rate, and rolls them into an easy-to-understand daily readiness score.
Okay, so if a female athlete is dealing with the GI distress or the underfueling we just talked about, how does that actually show up in the app?
Because poor fueling, severe GI distress, or the catabolic stress of fasting heavily impacts your systemic physiological recovery.
It drags the numbers down.
Exactly. If you underfueled a massive session yesterday, or if your gut was in knots from splanchnic hypoperfusion and you physically couldn't absorb your post-workout meal, your body remains in a stressed, depleted state. You will almost certainly see a measurable dip in your HRV or a low readiness score the next morning.
And the app catches that.
Yes. FitPA uses those precise dips as a signal. It prompts you to critically evaluate your fueling and hydration habits, not just your mechanical training load.
It connects the physiological dots that the athlete might miss.
Exactly. And the AI coach within the app can answer specific pacing or fueling questions based on your own historical physiological data.
That's incredibly useful.
It is. If your recovery markers consistently show you are not tolerating a heavy training block, well, perhaps because that morning cortisol is staying chronically elevated from underfueling, the AI coach can dynamically adjust your training plan. It can shift intense sessions to lighter recovery days so you don't dig a deeper REDS level hole.
It turns all this universal, peer-reviewed science into personalized, individualized action, which, honestly, really brings us to our final synthesis.
It does.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today, pulling from decades of research. But the unifying takeaway for you, the listener, is this. The true performance edge isn't found in blindly buying every new product with a pink label.
No, it absolutely is not. The marketing will always oversimplify the biology.
Right. The real edge is knowing exactly what is genuinely different about your physiology. Knowing that a female body is structurally built to burn fat. Knowing that her gut might need more grace and less stress during the luteal phase. Knowing that she needs total calorie surpluses, not just plate percentages, to actually carb load.
Totally.
And crucially, it's about separating those genuine differences from what is just solid, universal sports science, like the fact that everyone, regardless of sex, needs to individualize their sweat test and stay away from NSAIDs.
It is entirely about rejecting the generalized marketing and deeply embracing your specific biology.
Hmm.
We spend so much time obsessively tracking our splits, our power wattage, and our weekly mileage.
We all do it.
But what if the biggest PR of your life is hiding in plain sight?
Ooh, I like that.
What if that breakthrough could be unlocked simply by mapping your daily nutrition and hydration to the actual biological reality of your own body, rather than forcing yourself to fit the average of a study done on someone else 40 years ago?
I love that perspective. Think back to the broken X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of the show. The sports science landscape for women might seem murky and confusing at first glance, but once you know exactly what biological mechanisms you are looking for, the picture becomes incredibly clear. You don't need a broken diagnostic machine, you just need the right scientific lens. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking hard questions, keep challenging the marketing narratives, and keep exploring the fascinating science of your own potential.